All right, welcome everybody to another Break the Rules stream. I'm your host, Lev Polyakov, LevPo on Twitter, and today is our Euro trip stream. We are talking all about Europe, and we have some amazing guests lined up for you today. We have, of course, back with us the great Alexander Bard. It's a great pleasure to have you back, my friend. And we also have a lot of new guests over here. So we have Gareth Millward, and we also have...
Stream. I'm your host, Lev Polyakov.
Hold on. Oh, we got to shut that off right now. Here we go. Okay, because Andrej, we are going to get to you soon, but that does happen sometimes. You have to make sure that you have headphones on. So no, I gotta mute you right now. Okay. I have to mute Andrej. Please don't unmute yourself right now because I'm doing the introduction and you need some headphones in order for us to be able to get this stream done properly. But I will go back to you in a second and we are going to solve this. Anyway, we have with us, over here Gareth Millward, who is a Wellcome Trust Fellow at the University of Warwick Center for the History of Medicine, and your research focuses on the rhetoric around the sick note and medical certification in Britain and the foundation of the NHS to the present day. And we also have Ronan McRae, Professor of Constitutional and European Law at the University of College London. And of course, we also have with us the great Giovanni Panicietti joining us. And we have Martin Kay, big fan of Alexander, joining us as well. And we have Andrej. And Andrej, we are definitely going to work out what exactly is going on with the sound here, because I want the sound to work properly. But for those who don't know Andrej, he studied math at the University of Warsaw and former professor in the USA and Japan, and a British and Polish citizen and resident of Japan. So, konnichiwa, Andrej, thank you so much for coming in. And we are going to start this talk talking about, I want to go to everybody and first ask them what is it that they're specifically focusing on today, just in general, so that people who are not as wrapped into what you guys are doing have a better idea. And number two, when you think of your particular place in Europe, your particular country in Europe, what is a phrase or a word or whatever you want that first comes to mind? And then what comes to mind first when you think of Europe in general? So I would love to start this off with Ronan. So Ronan, go for it, my friend. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks very much for having me. Got this interesting question. So I have to remember what you should So when my work. So I teach law, so mainly European Union law. So for your listeners, the European Union it's basically a legal system. It covers, it's almost like federal law in the United States, but with a kind of more narrow range of topics. But European Union covers a lot of economic stuff, employment law, environmental law. I do specialism in religion and law. So what's the relationship between religion and the state? What are the limits on religion necessary in liberal democracies? And I do that in the context of Europe. So in terms of what I think of, what comes to mind when I think of Europe, that's a very good question. So I'm originally from Ireland. I've lived in a few other places, but I'm now in London. So I'm in the position of being from a country that's in the EU, but is now living in a country that's just left it. And I think for me growing up, it's interesting, it's probably specific to Ireland, but to me, growing up, Europe meant modernity. It meant kind of liberalism. It meant secularism. Ireland is now a very liberal country, but it was not. And it's largely because of the European Union that it is. Women had to leave. Women were fired from the Irish civil service upon marriage until we joined the European Union. Married women were not allowed work in the Irish civil service. And the European Union changed that, and they've changed a lot of things. So for me, I think that's what Europe meant. That's not what it means to a lot of people across the world. There's a lot of people for whom it means colonialism. There's a lot of people for whom it's the old world, high, rigid and stuff. But for Irish people, it has meant liberalism, secularism, and it's also meant a transcending of a difficult relationship with Britain, where we now, instead of being locked in a very historically angry bilateral relationship with Britain, we've got over that and we can move on by being part of the European Union.
Oh, I don't do sales pitches. Please. Yeah, I'm working on a new book, but because it isn't released, I can't promote it. Thank God. But yeah, it's a good time to write. A lot of my friends who are writers are obviously writing it. I was planning to write a new book anyway. So Jan Söderqvist not planning to release a new book next year, 2022. Yeah, I mean, I'm in Scandinavia. This is experimental like hell because obviously Norway and Finland are competing with Taiwan and South Korea and New Zealand, Australia for most successful strategy when it comes to minimizing the damage done by COVID-19. Although then Sweden stands out as the experimental. Okay, but let's take the social costs into perspective as well. So we let a few more people die that would die anyway sooner or later, and see if we can get away with it. That means the Stockholm Stock Exchange is probably better than anybody else in the world. We have more corpses than the Finns and the Norwegians have. But Scandinavians are huge to having these kind of experiments. That's why I'm all for Britain splitting up. And finally, the British Empire not only did Brexit, but will go down the drain, and Scotland can go independent, and Scotland and Ireland can join Scandinavia and go civilized, and England can stay with itself. I think we would all be better off that way. We can do comparative studies between these sort of closely related cultures. That's why Scandinavia is a great place to be, by the way. So yeah, I'm fine here. I mean, I love traveling. This was my first winter in 30 years in Scandinavia. I always go and get a fucking tropical villa somewhere and stay in Bali or Brazil or something in the winter, which makes the Scandinavian winters much more bearable. Like any Canadian would do the same thing. But this time,
Florida.
Hey, there you go, Canadian. So this time I had to stay. Made it really exotic. Went to the very north and dug into the dark and the snow and everything, and did the proper real Scandinavian winter this year. So, but I'm finished with it now. I'm dying to go traveling again, and obsessed with vaccinations and hope they work and I can get a vaccination passport and everything can get back to normal as quickly as possible. When it comes to the European Union, it's a disaster, right? Israel got it. The UK got it. We don't get the vaccines out to people in Europe. So the European Union itself will have a third wave coming this summer of even more people dying, even more coronavirus, even more COVID-19, even more mental breakdowns, even more divorces, even more little cute restaurants going down the drain and things. So we will have a mess. And today, on top of that, Denmark and Norway decided to ban the most common vaccine as well for being fair for blood clots or something. That's their decision. But when it comes to the distribution of vaccines, yeah, most of the vaccines are produced and invented by European Union countries, including the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. And still the European Union can't get their fucking shit together. We have no vaccines. We're going to die because of it. And it's all Brussels' fault. I'm for Swexit next. Let's do as the UK did. Let's leave.
Well, now I'm going to go to Gareth, your twin. Notice the outfit going on here. That's very interesting. Very coincidental. And also, speaking of vaccines, I mean, Gareth, you're really busy when it comes to the research and finding out what exactly is crack-a-lacking today with vaccination and with Europe. But before we get to that, what in general would you say does Europe mean to you, as well as where you are currently living?
Well, I think my kind of views of Europe are probably quite similar to Ronan's in the sense that the European Union kind of represented a bit more of kind of modernity and a sort of a shift away from older power structures. But I think that might be rather than because I was in Ireland during the past few years, just my generation. I'm in my mid-30s, so I think there was certainly a sort of an idea that the European Union was comparatively, Alexander anyway, a more liberal, more socially progressive kind of bulwark against some of the more reactionary right-wing kind of politics that was really taking root in Britain. So I do hope if you do get your Swexit, it is driven forward by Social Democrats rather than the hard right. But I think for me, my research at the moment is really on sort of medical certification and what that says about the British welfare state. And you can't really do the history of the British welfare state without understanding what Britain is relative to other countries. once you get sort of, once you're, I do post-war history, so it starts off with the sort of, how does Britain negotiate its place in the world when it's no longer the head of the empire, and how does it come to terms with the fact that it is one nation among many, and that it might be a good idea to get along with the French. And I guess as you move forward, obviously you kind of get into sort of the reaction against that to a certain extent. But my previous research was on British vaccination policy. So the past 12 months, where everything in the news has been about vaccines and about sick leave, have been very tiring. I did not become a historian to be relevant. I wanted to just sit in my little dusty archives and do stuff over there. But apparently the world has gone absolutely batshit, and now I must have opinions. So I have a few opinions. Maybe we'll get onto them later.
Absolutely. And we have Martin K., one of our great patrons. Martin K., how are you, my friend? And the same question for you. You are living in Norway right now, right?
Best country in the world, yes.
Best country in the world. Well, you do have a lot of oil, and that does make life pretty sweet for a lot of people there, at least from what I saw. But let me know what you think of Norway.
It's also what's messing us up, but that's a different case.
Well, we can certainly get to that as well. But just let me know, like, other than best country in the world, do you have anything else to add about Norway? And what would you like to say about the European Union, or about Europe in general?
I used to be a fan of the European Union. I also used to be a libertarian. I'm neither anymore. I'm a strong nationalist. I really don't like the EU as it's shaped right now. And I think the whole Europe is a mess, basically. It's going to be a shit show for a long time, and we've just seen the start of it with Brexit and Belgium. Yeah.
Well, we're definitely going to get into that. But last but not least, we have Andrej. Welcome back, Andrej. I think everything's working out really good with the sound right now. So please let us know the same thing. Go on.
Yes, I mean, actually, I worked out what happened. I had the YouTube on at the same time as the Zoom. So
there we go. Happens to the best of us.
Echo was coming. Yes. Well, okay. I am not sure what to say because perhaps it wasn't clear, but I actually lived for maybe I should say something about more precisely about my background, because after I immigrated from Poland in 1968, that is when I was about 15. And then I emigrated to the to England, to the UK, and I became a British citizen. So I'm a British citizen now. And then after I got my doctorate at Oxford, I went to Japan. My wife is Japanese, and I lived in Japan. And after that, I worked for something like several years as an associate professor in the United States, and then I went back to Japan. So actually, I spent probably the largest, more than 20, something like 25 years in Japan, maybe more, depending on how you connect different pieces. Actually, I haven't lived that much in the European Union. I have only been in Poland. I've been living in Poland for 10 years now. It's 10 years that have, and of course, when before I left Britain in 1980, of course, I remember the referendum, the EU referendum, and at that time I was actually in favor of the EU. I became much more skeptical later, and I began to, and of course, it's gradually grown. So again, my perspective is somewhat different because I have. My experience is, of course, I go constantly to Europe. I have a cousin in Germany and so on. So I mean, I do know it, but I don't have so much. Say, my relative viewpoint is from sort of one partly Japanese perspective and the current Polish perspective. which again is somewhat different from being in the West. So, I mean, I would say I am not never completely sure about what is going to happen in the future. I'm not one into predicting the future and so on. My view of the European Union is actually now very skeptical. I believe that it's got to a stage where I believe it's likely to. Well, I mean, people who are very fans of the European Union don't like any comparisons with the Soviet Union, and I would say, well, that's of course I'm not comparing. There are very, very important differences, but I would say that it actually reminds me a lot the current situation about the process that happened in Eastern Europe and particularly in the Soviet Union. That is the initial enthusiasm, the creation of the gradual disappearance of it. That, I mean, not counting anything. Not including, I'm not talking about any violence and so on. And then, and gradually the formation of a bureaucracy that now wants to perpetuate itself. Its main, and of course there are still, it's still relatively early stage. There are still many people who believe in some European ideal, which I myself tend to think as utopian, just like but of course we are not yet at the point where we can definitely say, in my opinion, that it's, how it's going to work out. I think people never realized, and of course, from the Polish perspective, the situation is different because, of course, right now the majority of the population here is still strongly in favor of the European Union. They believe that they benefited from it. This is changing, and I believe the process is only one way. So I think that my view is that I think the same is true elsewhere. I cannot see. However, of course, what's happening is the kind of inertia that emerges. There are more and more people for whom, like in the UK, for whom, firstly, there are people who benefit from it. Then there are people for whom leaving would actually turn their lives upside down. And so that actually would mean that there is a lot of already sort of support, which is an unenthusiastic support, the support which of the kind that where people think leaving would be more of a problem than staying. And I think the actual, so this is what I would say is right now the stage we're in. But how long it can go on like that I cannot say. I don't think it will last 70 years. But but I think it is it's sort of right now it could be quite a long.
Well, I want to bring up the main point of discontention right now that I am seeing, where let's say Gareth, you are in favor of having more social democrat leadership in the EU, and you see far-right elements sprouting up right now which concern you. And Martin, you are in the other direction, where you would see concern from the social democrats, or if you can elucidate a little bit for us, what do you see happening down the road that concerns you?
I'm just seeing the deterioration of civil society as we know it in so many ways. The economic problems are going to get worse and worse. And then the immigration problem is going to come back at the forefront with immense force, I think. And it's going to be very unfortunate for many immigrants and also the people living here. And I think we're going to divide up into much more clan-like small states with high level of civil disorder for many years, basically. That's what I'm seeing. I'm not saying it's going to start next year or a year after that, but it's in my lifetime, and I'm 36, so yeah.
And Gareth, do you agree with this? And I would love to ask this as well to Ronan, since you've been looking at the EU, and Alexander. So Gareth, go first, brother.
Yeah, well, it's not so much that I want more social democrats in the EU. I think, that there's a legitimate range of opinions across all the political spectrums. My main issue with the way that the Brexit debate was held in Britain was that the people that were pushing for it the hardest were the people who basically were the ones that thought they were going to benefit from having a low regulation, closed economy that had lower taxation and had nothing to do with maintaining any form of welfare state. There's not so much that you need more social democrats in the EU. I'm aware that there are other countries other than Britain where there are plenty of social democrats going on, and my political allegiances are more towards the centre left, and therefore that's just my sort of personal preference. But there are of course plenty of political opinions.
As an American, by the way, I'm not clear what exactly center left is, because our left and our right may be very different from yours.
Yes. Okay. Well, I mean, I think anyway. It'll depend on your particular viewpoint. I tend to believe that paying a little bit more tax than we do at the moment, and having a robust education, police, health system that provides not a minimal safety net, but a decent safety net to give everybody the opportunity to succeed in a capitalist economy, is on the whole a good idea. Obviously, your mileage may vary. You might have different opinions on that. It's not really my kind of position to sway you one way or the other. But yeah, that's what I mean by social democracy. I'm talking about the tradition in Britain that's perhaps embodied by the soft left wing of the Labour Party, I guess, if you need to put labels on that.
And this may be, again, the point of contention of some people thinking that this, mixed together with the immigration situation that's in Europe right now, would result in instability. I would love to go to Ronan and then to Alexander.
Before
please,
that, Lev,
yes.
Well, it's interesting you point that out, because I feel that some people have said that it's almost as if American domestic politics are now starting to almost like colonize, and ironically enough, colonize the European domestic political situation, in terms at least of the way that activism and so forth has been spread. It's largely like you see this weird Americanization of politics around the world. So I don't know if that's...
Very much so, yes.
Yeah. And another thing too I would ask before we move on to the panel would be, do you notice that there is a difference of national character when it comes, or rather regional character, when it comes to the attitudes of the European Union? So we have a Scandi over here. We have people who are products of the British Commonwealth who are more in favor of the EU. We have whether it's Ireland or Britain or so forth, and we have people who are Eurosceptics, who are more Slavic, Scandinavian, Mediterranean. So I wonder, do you feel that those differences play a role in the attitudes towards the EU, or is that just more of like an old world distinction that maybe should be, I don't know, bracketed or so forth?
I can speak for Norway. We voted no twice. Last time in 1994. It was a quite decisive victory, and it pushed to the forefront some like farmer. You can't really place them left or right, but very much the outskirts Farmers Party went up to like 20 points, which they're back at now, which says something. They're a very populist party too. And I think the general sentiment in Norway is very much pro-EU in the media, academia, and so on. But when you come to the countryside and regular people, not so much. And I also think many of the immigrants are not so pro-EU. We have many Eastern European immigrants. They're not pro-EU, except for the ability they had to move here. Because Norway is, even if we're not a member, we do actually implement more EU law than basically any other EU country. So there's an asterisk to our non-membership. And that goes for Norway, Switzerland, a couple of the other countries that's under the Schengen agreements and EU-S agreements, which makes us part of the market and also immigration and basically any kind of bureaucracy laws that the EU pushes, and our governments are usually the first to accept them and implement them.
Interesting. So I want to go to Ronan right now. This, even in the chat, you can see the sentiments of people is that Europe is committing suicide. And I'm curious what you basically think of this this contention that people are having, and whether you agree with Gareth. And then we're going to go to Alexander.
Well, so I would, the comparison to the USSR, I think, I think if you say, well, apart from the totalitarianism and the violence and the coercive nature of the USSR, the EU reminds me of it, is a little strange because the totalitarian coercive nature were the definitional characteristics of the USSR. So it's, I mean, once you say, apart from all that, the EU really reminds me of the USSR, I don't know what then is reminding you of the USSR in the EU. But, you know, look, the EU has problems. The Eurozone is a big problem. It's not fully integrated and it needs to be more integrated if it's going to work, or it may fall apart. There's a big problem. The EU is clashing with the Polish and Hungarian governments about judicial independence. That's a big threat to the European Union. But overall, and I'm not saying the European Union will last forever because countries often do things that are not in their long-term interests. But I think the real issue is that Europe faces a lot of problems, climate change, migration, things like that are cross-border. And the problem is because many European countries had an outsized role in world history, like France and Britain and Spain, they don't realize now that they're quite small. You know, Germany is 80 million people. India has over 1 billion. All the countries in Europe are countries that are small or don't know that they're small. If you know, the EU is it has one identity as a kind of post-national idealistic project, which I think has faded a little bit, but also is based on the reality that in a tough world, no European country will have any influence if it goes out on its own. But together, because actually the EU is still the biggest single market in the world, for instance, the default rules for producing products in the world are EU rules, because if you want, EU is the largest single market. No country will have the ability to for instance, legislate to force Google to pay proper money to journalists for content on their site. You can't do that alone. Ireland could never regulate Google alone because Google would tell Ireland to get lost. Well, Google can't tell the European Union to get lost. Now, there's lots of problems with the European Union. It has a bureaucracy, but of course, states have self-perpetuating bureaucracies too. It has problems. Its legislative processes are very rigid and difficult to change the laws once they're in place. But the European Union gives countries, particularly small countries, but also even mid-sized countries, an ability to influence the course of world affairs that they just don't have on their own. That doesn't mean it will last, because, I mean, look, the Austro-Hungarian Empire was probably in the interests, you know, if you lived in Slovakia and in 1910, you had 70 years of misery in store for you after the fall of the Habsburg Empire, but it still fell apart. So, you know, these things happen. Maybe the European Union will fall apart, but I don't think it's a coercive project. Britain has left the European Union of its own free will. There's been no Budapest 1956. There's been no Prague 1968 like attempts from the European Union to keep it. It's a voluntary union of states who wish to work together in their own self-interest. It's not perfect, but it's the best option the European states currently have. That's what I would say.
Thank you, Ronan.
Yeah.
No, that's really well said. And now we're going to go to Alexander. Alexander, do you agree with Ronan? And also, do you agree with your twin brother on the side over here?
I don't think European voters care about what Ronan just said. I don't think they care at all. I think if you look at the global map today, the winners are Singapore, Dubai. I think the old age of empires is an old European romantic fantasy. I think Austria-Hungary here is a fitting model actually for where the European Union is at today. It's like a loose federation of boring, tedious, expensive bureaucrats who come back and say, we did a deal with Google that some journalists will get paid. Do I care? No, I don't care. I don't care at all. The thing is that I care about Singapore and Dubai because they're winning models. I care about Estonia and Slovenia possibly being Singapore's and Dubai's in Europe. And even those small countries see less benefits from the European Union than other people do. Having said that, though, as things are right now, for example, in Scandinavia, Finland and the Baltic countries will definitely stay in the European Union because they're closely aligned with Germany historically against Russia. This is like a map issue here. That's why they have the euro. That's why they're much more integrated with the European Union. And in the future, sort of German-French alliance where Germany and France promise never go to war with one another. Countries that are closely aligned culturally with Germany and France can create a new union of some kind. When it comes to me sitting in Sweden, though, already now, it turns out, and this is not even in the news yet, because the news is just Corona. But this last fall, the European Union clubbed through a new budget where they start taxing European Union citizens directly without anybody having a say in that at all. Now, when Brussels start taxing people directly, this looks like madness to me. When the sort of seismology is being created in Europe right now, when the sort of pressure is being created out there among voters and people out there, where it's just like, and when Brexit won't mean that England will not fall down. Yes, it's a hassle right now. Of course it would be. Everybody knew that. But England's not going to go down the drain. England will probably open up to India, go back to the British Commonwealth and do well. And if England does well, that's terrible news for Brussels. It's terrible news for this storytelling that the European Union has to stand together because without it, we have no negotiating power. Well, nobody negotiates with the European Union anyway, because it's lazy, it's old, it's slow, bureaucratic, tedious, and expensive. Everything you don't want an empire to be. So besides that, there are the enormous pressures inside of Europe. Europe today is essentially north or south of the Alps. North of the Alps, all the productivity, in the sense that there is a tech sector today in Europe, in the sense that there's innovation, in the sense that there's fintech, biotech, everything. It's all happening in Germany, Scandinavia, Holland. That's Northern Europe, which basically where Spanish and Italian engineers are moving now in masses because they want to have a job, right? Italy, Spain, nothing happens. It's just tourism economy. Greece, what is Greece? Greece is like you put a feta cheese on a table with blue and white cloth on it. They have no innovations in that country since they invented that. They haven't had a single innovation in Greece over the past 2,000
Ronan
years.
wants
As
to.
a man, I'm getting pissed off right now.
Italy is the second biggest exporter in the Eurozone.
What?
Per capita, Italy is the second biggest exporter in the Eurozone. Northern Italy is a powerhouse economy. That's
I
know. Exports.
Wait a second. I know that. It's also a drain in southern Italy. And right now, Swedish taxpayers are going to discover over this year that they're going to pay billions and billions of dollars during the corona pandemic. Although they're running huge state budgets, negative budgets right now, they're also going to pay billions and billions of dollars to support a corrupt Italy that will refuses to, live by its own rules. It's just, this creates enormous culture. It's like a cultural seismology. And on top of that, you created the euro currency where you have separate national financial policies in place, but a shared currency. That is completely unsustainable. And if you think that the Brussels bureaucrats are going to convince all of Europe, they're going to give up their national financial policies after the European Union handled the corona disastrously, you must be mad if you think people are going to do that. They're going to stand up against this. In my case here, I think Sweden and Denmark will have a radical debate within the next 2 or 3 years on a Swexit and a Danksit, where Sweden and Denmark could leave, join the UK, Norway and Iceland, and create something northwestern, wealthy, much more progressive, tech-oriented, futuristic than the European Union dragging along all these poor economies in Southern Europe into the future. I think Europe as it is now is unsustainable. We just old, fat, dying people everywhere. It's just like
Ronan, go for it.
Yeah. So first, the European Union is not imposing direct taxes. They've agreed to borrow money, but it's all been ratified by the national parliaments. The EU does collect certain import duties on its own, but it's already done that. It is not imposing direct taxes on the member states.
No, it is. The environmental taxes will go directly to Brussels.
Second,
August 2020.
Calm down, Alex.
Second, the European Union has almost no power in public health. The problems that they've had in Sweden with the coronavirus was because the very specific choices of the Swedish government to pursue a herd immunity strategy. That's not the European Union. The European Union just doesn't have power in public health. It doesn't have the power to pass laws in that area. They obviously, as member states, sometimes coordinate their activities.
I only talked about the vaccination program. I didn't talk about public health.
Have the power to.
Wait, one at a time. Okay, let's go to Andrej, then Ronan, then Alexander.
The European Union did have the power. Something very important. It did have the power to completely mismanage the vaccination whole vaccination process, and this actually is going to have a long-lasting effect, probably, on the view of the European Union in many countries. I mean, this is not going to go away. This is going to be a very serious problem, and actually, as you know very well, Denmark, Austria already have actually basically got out of this common system by now making this, starting these deals with Israel to develop vaccines themselves, there is a very growing sense of great failure in this area, and this will actually, and this precisely shows the kind. I mean, actually, I think in this whole event, many problems with the European Union are just very visible. So this is not something that should be ignored. And actually, to say that the European Union didn't have the power, it actually did have the power to negotiate. It completely mismanaged it. It appointed people who had absolutely no idea how to deal with it. It was fantastic failure. And this is really, that's just connected with that remark. I wanted to say something about this comparison with the Soviet Union, because of course I didn't. What I meant, of course, was not, the Soviet Union was not firstly only the terror and totalitarianism. It was also the process of decline, the process which has very specific, and starting with the utopian idea with many believers, and then going through a long process through which where eventually it persisted, mostly because it was in the interest of the ruling class, until it failed because the ruling class itself, the bureaucracy, lost the belief in it, and not only lost the belief, but discovered that actually life was much better, even for relatively not well-off people in the West, than it was for the elite of the Soviet Union. I mean, a process like this is likely to take place. Eventually, the European elites will themselves discover that the system is not. It of course will depend very much what happens outside in the outside world. Actually, I mean that's another situation. If things go really badly outside, of course, and I think then of course this will have a different effect. We cannot be sure of that. I think also this is one reason why there is so much interest in the EU, or hope for some kind of failure by Britain, hope that Brexit will turn out to be a bad thing, hope, very visible ill wish, which actually I think is very well, has been actually very visible during this recent vaccine clash, and actually has been noticed in Britain. I mean, there has been very visible change in the attitude towards the EU in the UK when people have begun to realize precisely this, the ill wish, what looks like even hostility. I mean, with of course with formal declarations of undying friendship, and so this is.
Gio, and then I want to get to Ronan, and I do want to say one thing just in case I end up forgetting it. There is no, from what I understand, freedom of speech in Europe. Not at least the way that it is in America, and people have gone to jail for criticizing migrants, things like that. So already, just like as a side observer, something like that strikes me as being pretty negative and something that would lead to bad repercussions. But anyway, Gio,
hold on.
But you
can we have some specific examples?
Very different.
That's quite an incendiary thing to say.
It's completely
really?
different countries.
Okay.
You cannot. There is no common European.
But is there a freedom of speech in the same way that the United States has it?
Well, no, but there's no freedom of speech in any country in the same way as any other country. That's a legal issue for each individual state to decide.
There's a basic Euro minimum article. It's called Article. Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights protects freedom of speech. It's not as wide-ranging as the American First Amendment, and national constitutions are free to go ahead further if they wish. But to say there's no freedom of speech wouldn't be true at all. No, that would be an exaggeration.
But I mean, we do see, like for example, with these British police forces that have task force regulating social media posts, for instance. I mean, that's become very memeable, and it's very almost. I mean, it has a hilarious sort of tragicomic flavor to see resources being shifted that way. But I guess in general, what I would want to ask is the different attitudes towards. Well, I mean, it's almost inescapable to talk about healthcare systems, but maybe I guess this is a question more for Gareth.
Yes, but also before that, I just want to say we have a newcomer here.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So real quick, and Elizabeth Moutet, thank you so much for coming in. Hope everything is well. How's your cat? Everything is.
2 cats.
My cat is very resentful because she's been prodded and pricked and everything. So she's very resentful, and I'm, crossing fingers. She's a 16-year-old cat. And we just waited for a long time at the vet. It was all planned for me to be there on time, and then I wasn't. So apologies to everyone.
But you've got another one. You've got 2 cats, right?
I've got 2 cats.
Yes. So.
I have 2 cats. The elderly black one.
Yes, of course. Yeah. So.
Excellent. And for those who don't know, by the way,
yes.
For those who don't know, so Anne-Elizabeth Moutet, she works for The Telegraph, 28 Minutes, Arte TV, Unheard, Cap X, BBC, New York Post. So you have quite the wonderful credential sheet over here, and I'm really thankful for you being here today. And right now I want to go back to what Gio was talking about with the healthcare, but also if there is anything else you would like to add in the beginning as far as what you think of like the phrase or word or anything that you would think of when you would think of France. You live in Paris right now, and what do you think when you think of the EU? Like as far as just any phrase or word or anything of that nature.
We actually had someone that asked about, like, please talk about France in the chat.
Yes, here we go. Oui.
Well, first word that comes to mind is exhaustion. And that's the general spirit, the state of things in France because of the COVID crisis. That's one thing. And the mishandling of the COVID crisis by our government specifically, and then the mishandling of the vaccination procurement by the EU. And then to some extent, the incredibly spiteful attitude of our government, because it's very French not to acknowledge a mistake, essentially, because if you acknowledge a mistake, you're dead. So you lie about it, or you grandstand about it, or you derail, various ways of doing this. And so right now, I don't know whether I can find for you, but it's really something I have to send to you. It's the cover story of Le Point this week. And I've got it in my phone, which is not terribly useful, but I'm going to send it to myself, and then I can put it on there, about our vaccination campaign, in which last week, there was, 10 days ago, there was a virtual European summit being held on various encrypted equivalents to Zoom. And so Macron gave a press conference at the end of that, and you weren't, if you hadn't been paying attention, it was as if he'd had 200 journalists in front of him. He was at the Élysée. It was, as always, very smart. He talked for half an hour about the summit, and the first thing he said was that it was essential that the vaccination campaign should be organized through the European Union. That was the only way it could succeed. And at that stage, you thought, war is peace, slavery is freedom, whatever, because he was in a parallel universe. It was like Star Trek Deep Space Nine. It was amazing. This has been the case throughout. We kept on saying that we're doing very well, but we're not doing very well at all for various reasons. Some reasons are reasons of, no luck, which happens. Some reasons are reasons of mishandling, and some reasons are willful. The entire attitude of the government, this is coming out right now, is that from the start, from November, December, as they were sourcing those vaccines through the EU, or hoping that they were being sourced, the idea that they were aware that there was anti-vaxxer sentiment in France, and instead of thinking like the Israelis, for instance, or the Brits, let's do it and it will catch on because people will see how popular it is, which was the way many of the religious communities in Israel, Jews and Arabs, got interested in the vaccine. The whole point was that lots of people were very happy at getting the vaccines, and then suddenly it sort of started a kind of the excitement about it. The French had the exactly opposite attitude. The opposite was, we are going to go very slowly, and we're going to watch the others, and they'll be on guinea pigs. And if we do it like that, then people will be reassured. And like every other appeasement in history, it did not work, because the anti-vaxxers thought, well, there must be something terribly wrong with this vaccine since they're so scared. And what they were really scared were polls. And also the idea that there's an old French saying that goes, je suis leur chef, donc je les suis, I'm their leader and therefore I follow them. And that was exactly it. Whereas the whole notion of leadership has disappeared. So what you've got is a people who feel bruised because you don't sort of, have to comply to lots of authoritarian orders, which I think are perfectly founded. I'm not an anti-vaxxer, I'm not an anti-confinement. I believe in science, and I don't think that there are things that you have to go through, and our grandparents went through much worse. But all the same, this feeling that they didn't know where they were going was something that was incredibly disheartening. And look at Britain, which started so badly, and then got the collective bit between their collective teeth. That's a lot of teeth, and decided that they would go all out. Was it a gamble? To some extent, but it was a positive gamble, and what we've had in France were negative gambles. So is this harming the EU, considering that the EU was sort of not really an issue in France for so long, and because we were founding members of the Traité de Rome, and before that of the CECA, the Communauté Européenne du Charbon et de l'Acier, it takes a great deal for people to start being a bit worried about the EU, but the EU right now has demonstrated that it could be just as petty and inefficient as the worst bureaucracy, the worst of our bureaucracy. Our bureaucracy is also getting very bad when it was really a good, an effective bureaucracy. And that's an entirely different question, which is unrelated to the EU. But all of this makes for, it's interesting because it's a piece I've got to write slightly different angle, but the same piece for the Telegraph tomorrow. And essentially it is lack of trust, lack of optimism, which is not a French virtue at the best of times, or anger, I should say, a sort of nihilistic anger because you don't know exactly how to direct it. Macron was probably the first French president, or a French candidate for the presidency, who 4 years ago ran with as many blue and gold European EU flags as French flags. And those flags in the rallies were, of course, distributed to people coming in. So that they wanted this. And it was really, the whole point is Europe. And right now, because he is a French technocrat, used to be at the top of the pile for so long, the idea is that Angela Merkel is leaving and France is going to be the leader of the EU, and therefore I think he pays this incredible homage by name to Ursula von der Leyen for her wonderful vaccine rollout. And people notice all this. So we have a presidential election next year. That presidential election is looking very weird. As you know, we have a system in which we've got 2 rounds. The first round is a sort of, pick whoever you like. And the second round, except in very rare conditions, you get for the people who arrive first and second, and that's it. Every poll right now says it's going to be Marine Le Pen against Macron again. Most French people say we're not interested in having Macron and Marine Le Pen again. We saw that. They're not especially enthusiastic about her. She's perceived, probably with justice, as incompetent. Her party certainly is not a party. It's a sort of strange family sort of business. It's a bit of a family with a sort of...
By the way, are the Gilets...
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Are the Gilets jaunes still... Oh, sure.
The last poll on the second round, which is always, difficult. But if it's Macron and Marine Le Pen, it's 48-52, which means it's almost within the margin of error. And everybody's struck. And one of the reasons is that lots of people are saying, look, we voted for Chirac and against the father Le Pen in 2002 because we had to be a barrage against fascism. We voted for Macron, whom we didn't know, against Marine Le Pen in 2017. Same thing. We're not doing this again.
And then what about the Gilets jaunes, just real quick, because people were asking about that. Are the Gilets jaunes still active in France right now?
The Gilets jaunes are trying to sort of revive their thing on Saturdays, but there are many conditions in which make it difficult, and like everybody else, they're tired. But the spirit of the Gilets jaunes, which again is a nihilism that doesn't belong to a party, but which is very destructive in many ways. I mean, in the beginning, there was a great deal of understanding for the people. They were Trump people. And this is what happens when you've got the makings of the populist movement, but nobody seizes it. And Marine Le Pen tried to sort of go to their demonstrations, and they said, we're not interested, because they knew her. She was familiar. They felt that she'd been for long enough in this that, she was part of the game. And as an argument for populism, and I'm not sure that it's a valid argument, I have no idea what would happen, but there was nobody to embody that movement, and what happens is people who are not, who don't trust anything anymore. I'm not sure it's very good.
Well,
I would like to reminder.
Go for it.
Yeah, I would like to painting series of the Gilets Jaunes. Remember, Lev?
Yes.
I would like to add that this is common today, that we get these sort of internet-driven, romantically decentralized populist movements the last 3 days. I'll remind you of Occupy Wall Street. Occupy Wall Street lasted 3 days. The third day, the capitalists walked down to the demonstrators and sold them the T-shirts and the Instagram cameras so they could take their fucking picture and go home. There's no staying power in the Gilets Jaunes in France either, because the internet-driven, like you said correctly, Anne, you said that without a leader personifying the movement, they're doomed from day one. And now everybody gets that. So they're not scared of these demonstrators any longer as well. They're out.
So Alexander, you don't agree with Hart and Negri with the multitude idea of decentralized sort of singularities coming together?
I hate Hart and Negri with a vengeance. That book is so crap. Okay, if you read Empire, that book, that's romantic drivel of the worst kind, with a multitude crossing borders. And yeah, we saw that happening in Europe in 2016. We had about several 100,000 coming to Sweden. We have massive problems with integration. That it's just ghastly. It's just horrible. And no, nobody in Europe believes that kind of shit any longer. Nobody reads Hart and Negri. They're dead. They're out.
They read them in American literary departments.
They read Karl Marx these days. They read class analysis. They read taxation. They read books about redistribution of justice, and they hate woke and they hate Hart and Negri. That's where things are going with the left.
And Ronan, you had a question.
Yeah, so I just want to say, first, I think I agree with Anne-Elisabeth that the French election is a big threat to the European Union. The way the French two-round system works, last time they were pretty close actually to a second round between Jean-Luc Mélenchon and Marine Le Pen. They're 3 or 4 points off that, and that would be the end of the Eurozone. So there is a real worry about both the French electoral system, and Macron has destroyed the centre-right and centre-left. So when he's gone, who's left then to stand against Le Pen? There's a big gap there. In relation to the vaccine, I would say the European Union did mess up. There's a real problem in the European Union actually with approach to risk. There's an excessive risk aversion that then becomes risky. And here they drove bad, they focused on all the wrong things, on price and things like that. However, the other thing I would say is that the way the European Union works, the member states are very much have most of the power, and then the European Union institutions have a certain degree of power. In relation to the vaccine proposal, the member states agreed to every single decision the European Union made. Austria, which is now saying, we're going off to buy vaccines elsewhere, because they were the chair of the group, the steering group of states that devised the policy. Poland and Slovakia and Hungary, who are complaining that the European Union now, they want to buy other vaccines, they were the ones who said, we want to spend less. You're spending too much money on these French and German vaccines. So there's a large degree of hypocrisy of member states blaming the EU for things that they themselves are complicit in. And it's a problem with EU democracy. The member states, when we say Brussels did something, actually what we mean is Brussels and the member states did it. But the member states tend to just push things that don't go well onto the European Union. However, I do think that the Ursula von der Leyen has not been accountable enough for the failure. The European Medicines Agency is a bit more cautious. But member states, like I'm in Britain and I've actually had my first vaccine, which is great. I wouldn't have got it if I was still in Ireland. It's great. It's like you had a headache for 2 days and then felt fine. So it's quite exciting. And they have got everything else wrong on this pandemic, but they've got the vaccine right. Partly because they took a risk. But I think a justified criticism of the European Union is they have had such an aversion to any risk. And from my family live in France, and in Ireland, the health service wanted 58 pieces of information initially from everybody to get the vaccine. They said, we can't give it out quickly. You have to get 58 pieces of information from every person. I mean, I don't know what they're asking, like star sign or something. I think they narrowed it down a bit later and they're going quicker. But, and in France, my aunt, who's in her late 60s, is still waiting. So there's an ultra caution that ends up being incautious. So I do think the European Union messed up. But the member states who are now criticizing them and blaming the member were complicit in what went wrong.
Well, I guess the question for
Ronan,
hold on, I don't know what happened to Alexander there. We're going to have to see if the webcam goes. There we go.
People will go back to nation-state order. That's what they did during the pandemic. So the problem here is a perceptive one. You can argue as much as you like that the European Union is not to blame for this or that, but the perception will be, what is then the European Union for? If it doesn't add a value that our nation-states provide to us anyway, it can only cause us problem. Right now, it's also costly. So that's the problem. There's winning. There's no thing for the European Union to win in all this over the next 5 years.
I mean, it is like, so Germany would have got loads of vaccines on its own. It's a rich, wealthy, powerful country. France probably would have too, but it would take 20 years to distribute them, but they would have got them. But if you are a small country like Slovenia or Slovakia, you wouldn't have got vaccines on your own. Actually, Brussels did add value for those countries. And there was a degree of self-sacrifice on the part of Germany and France and to agree to coordinate. It should have gone better.
Ronan, Israel is 7 million people. They beat the shit out of everybody else. They're a small country.
Malta is in the European Union. They've done 15%.
Israel is 7 million. They're world top. So that's what people will compare with. Why are we not Israel?
Malta is one of the highest countries in the world, and they're an EU member state. They have 15% of their population.
That's an argument that voters would never even hear. I'm talking about perception here.
I can't control what voters hear or listen to.
Well, going back to the idea of perception here, when it comes to the way that people in Europe are perceiving, as was talked about before in the chat, Europe committing suicide. And this is goes a little bit further away from vaccination. I think that is an interesting discussion. But when it comes to what Anne-Elizabeth was talking about, this nihilism that people like part of the Gilets jaunes are feeling, I think part of it is economic, but I also think that parts of it may also be cultural, may also be related to immigration and whether there is, in terms of birth rates, going to be a same kind of Europe, culturally speaking, in the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years, or not. So I wanted to bring this into the discussion and curious what everybody thinks. So let's actually start with Anne, if you'd be interested in speaking about this. Oh, you gotta unmute yourself. You gotta mute yourself. You're muted right now. You gotta mute yourself, and everybody subscribe right now. Subscribe. Yes, there we go. Go for it.
There we go. About the nihilism. It's very interesting that we are coming to the polarization that you see practically everywhere is something in which you use essentially Chinese shadows more than real ideas. And on the one side, you can say, you've got the woke or whatever you want to call them, but basically people who say the world has to change, it's all about social justice. But it's something that is incredibly simplistic, and it's very dangerous because it's simplistic. It is sophisticated in terms of the application in society, because honestly, the parallels with the Chinese Cultural Revolution and the parallels with the old Soviet Union and satellites, that Andrej will know more than I do about it, but certainly it is very obvious. But the whole point of deconstruction, if you do it right, aiming for their goals, is that when you've just deconstructed enough, people have no memory. So that's one thing. And on the other side, you've got what the French under the revolution called le marais, not the swamp at all, the sort of people who were not sure what they were on one side or the other, and who have no arguments, the centrists. And then you've got the populist right, which is the whole range from deeply unsavory to, well, actually, it might be working, that thing. But they are demonized by the others. And to be honest, you can always, I come from the left and I now really skew right, but I remember what, lots of things of what they were like before. And certainly, whenever I hear too much from my friends on the right, and I like them dearly, but most of them, honestly, will shoot themselves in the foot at one stage or another. The lack of sophistication at one stage, Trump is a very good example. Trump is actually, to my mind, not a man of the right. I think he actually felt very strongly the demand of the Trump voters. I think there was a real symbiosis, and I think that was actually something. There aren't that many things that were honest about Trump, but I think that actually was honest, which is why they perceived it. It's not a very popular opinion, but he comes from Queens. He worked with construction gangs all his life. He knows these people, and he feels familiar. He's interested in the same thing as they are: lots of gold and large boobs. So there was something together, and he himself has been looking. His father was a millionaire, not a billionaire, and he was a millionaire in Queens, and Trump wanted to make it in Manhattan his way. He's got lots of unpleasant aspects, and certainly he shot himself in the foot spectacularly with the Capitol thing. But there was something that he identified. And this is why many, this is also, there's a danger in this, because there's a danger on the right to, for the populists, we know where they go. And God knows that if we didn't know where they go, the other side would tell us where they went many times. But it means that at the end of the day, you don't have the means to have a great force of conviction and a sophistication of thought underpinning it. To some extent, that's what Reagan had. To a large extent, that's what Reagan had. That's certainly what Margaret Thatcher had. But they were within the framework of parties that they were not trying to change. They did change them, but they didn't come saying, I want to upset everything. They didn't do a Meghan Markle and come in and say, nice castle you've got, I'm going to repaint everything orange. Well,
they were neoliberal. Is that hard?
I don't know where we're going on this one, because all I can do, and I'm a journalist, I'm not a great thinker. I write little things in the paper, but the situation right now is that nobody is offering any space for people, and I say just space to breathe and start thinking when you breathe. I'm not sure politics can do this. Every now and then it does, and probably it stumbles into it by mistake and finds it interesting. But there's no ideology except the mechanical totalitarian ideology of the left, and on the right there's anger. I'm not sure where we can find something on this, but I'm not losing hope on the right in other countries. I've totally lost hope about the right in France, because you've got Marine Le Pen, who actually is not a fascist. She's got a family business. You've got a small crowd of people whose ideology belongs to the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century. They're polite, usually cultured, and they have no idea what tomorrow's world looked like, which is really strange. And so, to my mind, they can do damage, and mostly they're useless. You've got a vast sort of centrist or centre-right movement in which the last interesting character was Nicolas Sarkozy. I'm in a small minority in regretting Sarkozy. There was something about Sarkozy, and he was clumsy and impatient, but there was actually something interesting, because there was a hinterland in Sarkozy's will to do something. He was also a great politician, which people have forgotten. Anyway, Sarkozy has been killed by activist judges, and he's gone. He will not come back, and his party has not learned anything from this. And right now you've got 5 or 6 figures on the French right who are duking it out, and we're going to have a choice of 3 or 4 lackluster candidates for the right, and I don't think they can win. And on the left, the democratic left, as you know, pas grand-chose, but by and large, if you take polls in France is more, declares itself. People in polls are more right-wing or conservative than they are on the left, except that they don't really know what they mean by conservative. The other thing is the French are not very aware of what various conservative movements are like in the rest of the world. There is always a lack of French people to bring it on international conferences of intellectuals and politicians together. And I've always been amazed by the fact that I would go to a conference in Washington or Budapest or other place, and I'd find all sorts of nationalities, and there would be a small contingent of French people who would insist to speak in French on the rostrum, even though 95% of the audience understands English directly, and who essentially were doing demonstrative.
And
Yes.
real quick, I just wanted to add that when it comes to this dissatisfaction that people are seeing and the solution to that, I personally, just my own view, is that I am for anybody as far as having an open door, as long as they're able to integrate within the culture and have the culture be something that rises them up to a higher level. Like we had in Russia, we had a conversation about this before, Anne Elizabeth. Like in Russia, we had Hannibal, who was adopted by Peter the Great, and then came Pushkin, the great Pushkin, who was responsible for the modern Russian language. And of course, you have Alexander Dumas, in France. So again, there are so many examples of people who are able to come in and create the best culture from the areas that their ancestors, like near ancestors or themselves, have been able to integrate into. But I think the problem today is that, at least in the minds of people who are talking about this, they are not seeing that. And in a wide sense, they are seeing more disconnection, kind of like separate tribes away from the dominant culture, and they're concerned about that. But also to the point that when Gareth was talking about that, every country is different when it comes to freedom of speech, and I agree. But there still, at least to me, seems to be a pattern when I look at various countries in the EU of that kind of criticism being something that's really iron-fistedly against, as far as police coming in and arresting people for quote-unquote hate speech. So I think this is also one of the elements that makes people react so negatively when they're not able to express themselves, and it ends up putting them in much more of an echo chamber and not even hearing, a better perspective on how a lot of these things could be addressed. So
maybe we could...
I think you should distinguish two things, because
Go ahead.
on the one hand, sorry for interrupting, but on the one hand, it is true that many European countries have a different tradition and different attitude to free speech as such than the United States. So that's one aspect. On the other hand, I don't think it's true that there is a uniform European sort of ideology that is being uniformly exposed. I mean, for example, take one example which nobody talks about, but I think it's extremely interesting in Europe, and that is Denmark. I mean, that is the current Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen. Denmark is actually on this precisely issue of immigration exactly right now. It actually, if for example, Trump did the kind of thing that the Danish government has been doing and saying, there would be tremendous uproar. And that is also the Social Democratic Party, which actually has now, and the situation that now exists in Denmark is this: that we've got the right and the traditional left, because that's what actually the current prime minister is, and so on, who actually have basically agree on the most fundamental issue, and they put what may be called the globalists or liberals or whatever in a situation where they don't have any room, because both right and left are occupied. So this actually could be the direction. I mean, I don't know. This could be a future direction of Europe. Maybe we don't see an example elsewhere, but it could be that
I can
from the
explain
left
that
may
because I'm from
emerge.
Scandinavia. So the way you see it from Scandinavia is that these are very tech-savvy countries. They think more of themselves as California than think of themselves as Southern Europe. So you got a lot of tech companies in Sweden, Finland, Norway, Denmark, highly advanced economies. They're big in biotech. Denmark is world leading in these things. They're just tired of taking on poor refugees coming from Eritrea and Afghanistan who cannot even take on courier jobs in these economies. They would gladly invite people coming from more educated places in the world to move to these countries and then take on high-paid jobs. So it's not a racist policy at all. That's exactly why the left has embraced it. So what the left wants is basically look at Australia, Canada, the countries that have large immigration populations that actually go straight to work and start companies and become an integral part of the economy. That's where Scandinavia is heading. The question here, I think, is that where Scandinavia and Holland are looking at themselves as 30 million people, northern end of Europe, highly skilled economies, very advanced, highly educational. They look like the wealthier parts of America and the best parts of the UK. They're now watching Brexit. And if Brexit is not a flop, if Brexit works, they will certainly have much more of a discourse in these countries. Like, why are we being heavily taxed by the European Union to pay for bills for people in Sicily and Greece who never get their shit together? Because all the problems the European Union had up to 2018 were just buried underneath the corona pandemic. The corona pandemic has then been mishandled on top of that. And out of that comes all these questions coming roaring back again by 2022. The problems with migration, the problems with unemployment in Southern Europe, the problems with not getting the right people to move to Northern Europe, and how Northern Europe, north of the Alps, is pulling the economy from south of the Alps, when essentially Southern Europe is just becoming a tourism economy where wealthy Northern Europeans go and buy property at best. That's the larger picture. France is torn right in between these two forces. Germany and Scandinavia and Holland are now, they're like, if we're going to be the wealth producers, the tech economies, the new economies that start all the new companies in Europe, if that's going to pull the economy out, unemployment in Sweden is record low, even in the midst of the pandemic. So if these countries are going to pull off, they're going to ask themselves the question, why are we paying such a huge bill to Brussels and we get so little out of it? And then you look at Central Europe, where we have manufacturing now in Europe. It's all in countries like Czech Republic, Slovakia, Ukraine, Poland, because they pay less there than they do in France and Germany, but they work just as hard as the Germans and the French do. That's, for example, the European car industry. It's located in Slovakia these days. Slovakia is the main production country of the European car industry. But the Central Europeans have very, very far-right governments today. They've gone in that direction dramatically in the last few years. They don't care too much about democracy, but they care about their economies working. They've isolated the countries during the pandemic, and they're also going to ask themselves the question, what is the deal here? What are we part of, and why would it pay off for us?
All of it based. Red pill, no.
Can I
but Alexander, I didn't. Oh, sorry, Ronan. But no, Alex. Ronan, you go. But yes, Alex, he seems to want to create a neo-China within, a Singaporean neo-China within Scandinavia. So
I work as a consultant for the Slovenian government. I used to work as a consultant for the Estonian government, and I'm proud of it. I work with tiny countries where 10 people can decide things and get things on the move. I hate empires.
Go ahead.
Go for it, Ronan.
The European Union budget is 1% of EU GNP. So it's not true that people are being heavily taxed to fund European Union, because it's 1% of EU GNP. That's all, and it's limited by law to that. So it's not bigger. And I will say that to blame the EU for whatever issues various countries have on migration, well, the fact that Danish policies are so radically different, for instance, to Swedish policies or French policies or Italian policies, shows that within the framework of the European Union, member states can make very different choices on migration policy and integration policy. I think, of course, America and North America, indeed Canada too, has a national stories based on migration, which is different. But within Europe, we have our own migration stories. They're not the national foundation story because they're not settler societies. But like Sarkozy is a Hungarian name. There's been migration within Europe. And France, I agree that there's pessimism, but France is that the name, the writer who said it forgets, but it's, France is a wonderful country with a strong economy, amazing public services, food and things. But they say, France is people a population who live in paradise who are convinced they live in hell. And things work pretty well in France. And tax is very high, but the state can do an awful lot.
But culturally, do things work well in France? As far as somebody was asking before, how safe would you be walking down certain French areas, certain, you could say ghettos? I'm not sure what the right term here would be.
In a lot of areas, France doesn't have particularly high crime, but one interesting, because you're talking about the Americanization of European politics and identity politics, and it's quite interesting that France is one of the only places that has maintained its own separate intellectual traditions, where, because you do see, I do notice that American coverage of French issues, particularly issues of laïcité and secularism, there's an attempt, it's like Cinderella's sister, trying to squeeze French, something that comes from very specific tradition in French history of republicanism and citizenship, and they just try and apply an American frame of reference to it that
they don't
looks at laws that are very complicated and often quite left-wing support and makes them into some kind of Jim Crow equivalent. That just to apply an American framework to French debates around religion and secularism and citizenship is just wrong. But France has a very strong ability it still has its own intellectual traditions, and it conducts public debate and pushes back against that in quite an admirable way. Look, I'm not saying France is getting it all right, because there are ways in which laïcité is being instrumentalized by Marine Le Pen and her friends who never liked it before it became an anti-migrant tool. But at least there is my sense is that in France there is really vibrant public debate on these issues in a way that is certainly not the case in the United States and Canada and to some degree in Britain. I think that there is a very vibrant different ways of looking at things that are not just all about identity politics.
Well, you would say that France is also, when it comes to notions of secularism, it's simply not the same case as the American, like, Anglo-Saxon Protestant notion of secularism. I mean, France is the land of extremes. I mean, they have the most like positive atheists right in the country, the most trad caths, right? So that, but I wanted to get Gareth in here. I wanted to ask.
Could I just say one last thing for 2 seconds?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just because the history of French secularism in America, they separated religion and state in order to protect religion from domination by the state. In France, they separated religion and state in order to prevent domination of the state by religion. It's a very different way of looking at things. And I think the Americans don't understand that that's the history. The Republic beat the Catholic Church. That's where it comes from.
Well, if it would work from the
unfortunately.
Well, if it would work from the inside, but the problem is that, like, even over here in Brooklyn, it's a very, you could say, multicultural situation that we're in here, where we have people who are Jews, people who are Muslim, living side by side. But as far as what actually creates the worldview of somebody who, let's say, has certain traditions that have been passed down from master to disciple, not only in terms of law of, how you should eat, how you should marry, but also in terms of military law, in terms of how you fight battles and morality law and things that, theoretically speaking, in like 100 years or 50 years or whatever, there may come a time where certain areas would end up, from the mentality on the outside, coming to the fore, where people would elect people who would rather have a separation between what, let's say, the French way of life is versus what the way of life was in Algiers before it became a colony of France. As an example with the...
Barack Obama has rightly said, and picking up on things that people from Harvard and recent other people have said, look, the project of building a multicultural society in which a previously dominant ethnic group is now a minority is one that we don't have many precedents for. We don't know how it's going to work out. And I think it is absolutely false to the implication of many people that we know it's fine and anyone who's worried about how it might work out is foolish. No, or bigoted. That's not true. We don't know how it's going to work out, but we have plenty of resources. You have to believe a little bit in liberal democratic societies. We have plenty of resources in our societies to deal with these problems. It won't always be easy. Europe owes a lot of the world, certainly Britain and France do, for their colonial adventures elsewhere. And so we need to keep an open door partly for those reasons too. But,
what wasn't an empire though? Who didn't have colonies? Iran had colonies. Africa had their own colonies within Africa itself. The difference is that the Europeans actually stopped.
France's history in Algeria is pretty...
Yeah. No, it's pretty bad. But again, compared to what? Everybody was bad.
I'm not saying that means they have to let everybody in, but reality is France has 10 million Muslims in it. We have to all get on. And France actually is in some ways better placed than most places because French Muslims are the most liberal Muslims in Europe by some degree. France has the highest rate of friendships across religious divide, mutual esteem. So France has lots of good things going for it. Again, you're not going to read about it in a lot of the Anglophone press because they love to demonize the French secular model. But France actually has a lot going for it, probably a better chance of making it work than some other places. And it's also, we don't have any choice but to make it work. Maybe if people...
Well, what about Saudi Arabia? There's a really big Middle East out there, and I'm sure that they would love to be, around people who are interested in ways of life that are similar to theirs as far as traditions go. I mean, that's...
Because we have a few guests that have to
Yes.
go.
Yeah,
but I would say...
I have to go soon, actually.
I would agree with Houellebecq, though, that it's really... I mean, we should protect... the Muslim migrants from liberalism, but that's my own.
That's Gio's whole different take.
Yeah, but that's. I think that was the book submission. But Gareth, I wanted to ask you because it seems inevitably that we're leading back to. It comes up when it comes to European politics, but also even in America, you could really say about the Anglosphere legalism, specifically when it comes to healthcare. So maybe you could give us an insight as to why the NHS is such a dominant force within not just British society, but British culture, and it's taken a hit with the pandemic, but also it seems to me it's really alien, especially for Americans, because, for example, one of the ad campaigns was protect the NHS, not protect the nurses or doctors, protect the NHS as the system itself. I mean, coming from a country that has the same sort of, I mean, worship is a strong word, but let's just say worship of the healthcare system. What do you think is the sort of the attitudes that British people have towards their system, as opposed to, say, people in Poland, people in Hungary, people in Scandinavia, they do have a strong healthcare system. But this is your expertise, and maybe you should sort of defend. You're taking the role of defending the attitude that the British public have towards these institutions, especially the NHS. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll get on to that. I mean, the first thing I would say in relation to these other things, I think also this issue of being no-go zones in the French suburbs. You hear about London as well with these no-go zones. You hear about it in the city I live in Birmingham. There is no-go zones because of immigration. It's complete and utter bullshit, most of it. There are crimes. Some of those crimes are committed by immigrants. The idea that immigration is causing these problems is absolutely bullshit. As for the NHS, one of the reasons why the NHS is so revered in this country is because it's one of those few national institutions which has survived since the aftermath of the Second World War. Our national insurance system for unemployment and sickness benefits, all that kind of stuff, that's fragmented, become more privatized, become more kind of personal insurance based, and has kind of withered away. And it's kind of become one of those things that can be demonized as a thing. Oh, well, only the poor use that. Whereas the NHS is one of those few parts of probably, other than the schools, it's the one thing that everybody uses and everybody has some kind of stake in. And for whatever reason, the idea that you all pay in and you can all take out, healthcare is the one thing that the British still seem to agree, yes, that should be one of those things that we do. And I do find it actually interesting, Gio. I find it really interesting because as a historian of the welfare state, we had healthcare before the NHS started. And I'm saying this as somebody that's a massive fan of the NHS and free healthcare, or free at the point of delivery healthcare. I understand I pay taxes. We had healthcare beforehand. There was a healthcare system for the very poor. There was an insurance system for those people who were employed. There was a private healthcare system for those people who could afford that level of care. All of that was there before the NHS started. And the cost of converting our health system into another health system would be massively prohibitive. But the French healthcare system seems to work pretty well. The German one seems to work pretty well. The Swedish one seems to work pretty well. There are other ways of funding it. There are other ways of running it. But for whatever reason, I think the NHS is one of those cross-party things that has survived in the mythologies of both the Conservative Party and the Labour Party, which are basically the two parties that have any chance of getting into power in this country. And I kind of get it from that kind of cultural connection thing when we've lost so many of those things that bind us together. And immigration is one of those things. We tended to think of ourselves as a homogenous white society. We can't tell ourselves that lie anymore because immigration is much more visible. And maybe the NHS is that one thing that actually does transcend race. It does transcend the individual nations within the UK, England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. It does transcend class in a way that virtually nothing else in Britain transcends class. And I think that's one of the things that it kind of represents Britain in a really weird way. The other way it represents Britain is that it's underfunded and it's falling apart. So maybe that's the other thing. That
well, I wanted to also
feel a bit nicer.
I have to go, everybody. So thank you very much.
Oh, go ahead.
Ronan, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here. It is a great pleasure.
Very nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you too. And guys, you could find out more stuff about Ronan. I'm going to show the link right now. So guys, be sure to follow Ronan on Twitter. And I really appreciate him taking the time to talk with us over here. Ronan McRae, here we go. Here it is in the chat, everybody. So be sure to subscribe to Professor McRae. And I'm so honored to have you here. These are very important conversations. And once again, I just wanted to quickly say that, like I said before, to me, culture transcends any characteristic as far as, where you come from, facially or whatever, like all that stuff. I don't care about. What I care about is what do you bring to the table as a human being, as a person, and that's a much more complicated discussion. So I hope, Ronan, I would love for you to come back later on, and I would love to continue it, because I think it is important. I don't want to push people into an echo chamber where they're going to be xenophobic and distrust people depending on what they look like. Rather, I would want them to, and I know discriminating is a very powerful word, but I think there is discrimination that may be good in the sense of if you see people who are acting in such a way that is completely antithetical to the beliefs that you hold, to how you want to live your life, there is no reason why you should be together. And I think that as long as that balance is maintained, no discrimination whatsoever on these characteristics that people were born with, but at the same time, having a good kind of judgment when it comes to what is compatible or not, that is at least what I hope to have happen. But I would love to ask Alexander as well, with the situation in Sweden right now, what your perspective is. So Ronan, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Bye.
Oh, I guess we had two people going away. Oh man, I wanted to ask him, but
Gareth and Ronan had to leave, so that they're.
I know. Well, Gareth, he was a trooper because the chat really. Oh boy. I don't know. I do think in Europe it is different, because Europe, I mean, these are countries of origins for these ethnic groups. I mean, I know it's like a fucking the British is for Britain is for the British, but I do. I don't want to get into trouble, but yes, Britain should be for the British, French should be for French, blah blah blah. And Alexander, please, as a Calabrese person,
Scandinavia for the Scandinavian.
Well, Alexander, you are deeply offending me as a Calabrese person. So Calabrese, I mean,
I love the wine.
Oh,
yeah, I love the Airbnb.
But I think
it's just that it's not a really wealthy, futuristic economy. I mean, that's the problem.
That is, let's face it. That's the truth. It is.
Okay. This is the perspective of Europe from how it will work. The way it will work is that north of the Alps, where you have the growth, economic growth, you have the top education levels, best universities, and the entrepreneurial spirit. So starting a company in Sweden is 1,000 times easier than starting a company in Italy. That's just a fact. Bureaucracy is still enormous. Red tape is enormous in Southern Europe. So Italy is like just getting your house, buying a house in Italy, property. You need 50 different bureaucrats to stamp different.
Yeah,
documents. It's like Egypt. Yes. It's that bad, right? So the thing is this, what will happen more, it's already happened in Europe, is that you will see Southern Europe go into sort of a tourism, older people, Florida type at best type of economies. It's just like wealthy Germans and Scandinavians will move there. If you look at Majorca after the 2008 crisis, the property prices in Majorca, the Balearic Islands, didn't follow the mainland Spain at all. I mean, Barcelona was completely disconnected from Majorca because Majorca had already turned into a German Scandinavian economy. Every damn property on the island was owned by a German or a Scandinavian. So the Canary Islands, that's like the Hawaii of Europe, not of Spain. People go from everywhere in Europe to these places. They buy property, they settle there. And when they get older and they have tons of money, and there's a lot of old, wealthy people in Europe, and they all move to these places. But that is now the economy. And that's why the corona pandemic hit Southern Europe so damn hard, because these countries are locked up. They're still locked up. Portugal is poor now. Greece is poor. Southern Italy is poor like shit. And now the EU is going to pay tons of money to these things, whether Ronan understands that or not. And this money is going to come out of countries like Holland and Sweden. And once the corona will be over, they will discover, the voters in these countries will discover, what the fuck? All this money they took from us and gave there, and still we're running these huge negative budgets to get over the corona pandemic locally in our countries too. I don't think this is sustainable at all. The European Union wasn't popular before the corona. It had major credibility problems. That's why Brexit happened. And with Switzerland and Norway and the UK being out of it and probably all doing pretty well, I think the debate is going to go on for years to come, whether you should stay in the European Union or not. It's not going to expand anymore. It's going to shrink. It either has to get smaller quickly to then stay credible, because the German-French alliance has to be there in the first place. And some countries like Finland and the Baltic states will love to be part of that for old historical security reasons. They will not leave. But a lot of countries like Sweden, Denmark, and Holland could play with the idea that maybe we should leave. Austria can play with the idea we could be Switzerland. So wherever you can mimic the outside of the EU model, countries will start playing with that idea. And that will put pressure on the EU to get smaller, to shrink. And it would create pressure on the EU to dissolve the euro eventually, because the euro cannot hold. The euro is bound to be a massive Tokyo earthquake sooner or later. You cannot run separate financial policies in all EU countries while you pretend you have a shared currency. The pressure inside the euro union right now is enormous already, and it will not hold. It's completely unsustainable. And to detangle the euro without severely damaging the European Union, I don't know how the hell that's going to work. Because anybody who's pro the European Union has been pro the euro project. And it's terribly, badly designed.
But I wanted to get Anne Elizabeth, your thoughts on what Bart just said, but also about the so-called far right in the Eurozone. It seems that right-wing populism is almost, if you look at the intellectual tradition of, for example, the Nouveau Droit, which was largely in France, it's almost like right-wing populism is a misnomer. I mean, these were like elitist, aristocratic, like, you know, Tom Sunik, Benoit, people like that. It seems that right-wing populism is almost like an American invention that is.
They're not populist. I mean, they are not. Oh, sorry. Yeah, they are not.
Oh, go ahead. Yes. Please.
One, they were not populists, and at the time, because they appear in the 70s, really, and it's kind of reaction. You have the new philosophers on one side, but the new philosophers are too international, cosmopolitan, that sort of thing.
Benoit is a cosmopolitan in a way. Yeah.
Well, Benoit isn't. Benoit isn't.
Well, it's they become, but then they sell themselves out to the American alternative, right? And then you go ahead. Sorry.
One of the things that you have to understand about the Nouvelle Droite, and Nouveau was because of the Nouveau Philosophe. And basically, these are people who are still refighting the battles of 1940 to 1944. And they essentially come from the Maurassien family, the one that Steve Bannon is talking about, but actually Bannon's Maurassisme is not at all the Maurassisme of somebody like Benoit, who was steeped in it since childhood. And they are people who are looking back. They are people whose vision of populism absolutely belongs in the 20s and 30s. Not all of them belonged or had parents or family or something that belonged to the collaboration. But there's this trauma. For them, intellectual trauma, I should say, that they were the bad people, and they decided to again use sort of the modern vocabulary. They decided to sort of own it and be proud of it. And the other thing is they are ascetics, many of them, and the ones who said that they were for free enterprise, the Pascal Salins, the Florin Talions, they never went far because there was no terrain, there was no earth, there was no loom for them to grow something and make it happen in France. France is a country that has never believed in capitalism. It's never believed in free trade. And it dates back from long before the revolution. It is a very regulated country. It's always worried about trade. I mean, in the Renaissance, worried about trade.
Especially
and look what I found, by the way. So sorry it took so long, but here is the cover from Le Point.
Ah, voila, finally.
Well, especially after 68, that anti-capitalist sentiment was the orthodoxy after it.
Yes, but it's the French right is really a very specific thing, and
yes.
You meet them. I know many of them, and I don't want to sort of just talk about individuals. But at the end of the day, they are into what I'm sorry to call a pissing contest of intellect. They are very sterile in that matter, in that way, because
it's like over here.
All those arcane cultural references, and they end up, and these are people who've got not inconsiderable intellects, and they end up sort of anti-vaxxers and sort of pro-Putin without quite knowing exactly why they're pro-Putin. There are aspects that they refuse to look at, and it's a waste of good intellect because they do not breathe. So you find more or less interesting ones. What worries me about somebody like Marion Le Pen. Marion Le Pen is an interesting character, much more interesting than her aunt, because she is somebody who is uncertain of her own intellect, but she's very hardworking. And if I wanted to be nasty, I'd say she's a swot, but I have great respect for somebody who, when she decided to sort of take time off from politics, but build up her school in Lyon and meet people, she would meet with practically everybody who would see her, and she would take notes for 2-3 hours. And that's, you know, you start thinking, okay, there's somebody who's trying things. And I've seen Marion Le Pen perform well, and I've seen her perform less well, and I see the intellectuals who are around her, and there might be something interesting there. First, because she herself is open to the rest of the world. She speaks excellent Italian. She speaks excellent English. She reads in those languages. She's friends with the Salvini crowd in Italy. She was a massive success at CPAC 2 years ago.
That's right. Yes.
She gave this excellent speech, and one of the things about this excellent speech is that speech had been modeled for an American audience, and she knew how to listen and how to do it. She gave another speech in English at the almost a little bit over a year ago in Rome at this conference of the rights, nationalist conference where I was, and her speech was very good English, but basically it was a French structure translated into English because she was working with the people that she had with her who were French at the time, and it didn't go well at all. I mean, people were happy and they clapped, but it didn't go well because they said, oh, well, she's giving us this incredible historical expose and all this, and do we need all this? And that's basically where the French suffer. Her speech with different IDs was a Macron speech. It was all about essentially doing an essay for Sciences Po, and that's what the right suffers from.
Are you familiar? You're familiar with NRX neo-reactionary stuff over here? I mean, that's the same fate of over, like neo-reactionary thinking, which is very much part of.
Unless you tell me names and I know them.
Like mention Small Bucknick Land people. The sort of
this is different, I would say, Gio. I think what Anne Elizabeth brilliant is talking about here is that we see a rise of a sort of well-educated, very smart form of nationalism in Europe.
Yes,
but it's not based on the conviction that I'm a nationalist or proto-racist or anything. It's more like I'm a cosmopolitan person, but let's be humane here and let's understand what actually works. So it's much more of a sort of a historically grounded European pragmatic form of nationalism. I definitely think that's going to be the next big thing in Europe. The same thing in Sweden, Germany, as in France. I think over the next 10 to 15 years, because I meet a lot of these kids now are coming out of academics and they're clever. They know exactly how to step. Yes. They know the landscape. They're mature.
We do not have them in France, but I've met them in Hungary. And I've been absolutely blown away by the young people. I mean, the reason why I've been to Hungary several times is that I'm an old friend of Joan O'Sullivan's, who started the Danube Institute in Budapest. And so he said, come over. And I was blown away by the quality of the 30-year-olds who are at the Matthias Corvinus Collegium or who are with the Orban team. And I understand, I can see that Orban has got, Orban himself is an interesting character. When he read Yoram Hazony's book about nationalism, he invited Hazony, he talked with Hazony, he took time off to discuss this. I mean, he's perfectly capable of intellectual curiosity, and at the same time, he's a really sort of canny grassroots politician who does exactly, he said this in Rome, he spoke for 90 minutes in Rome and it's online on YouTube, and it's really worth listening to because he says, if you don't win elections, being clever is no use. Having ideas
and the North American press, they think he's like a Nazi, and he's
the French think he's a Nazi. I
had BBC especially.
I had a public spat with Nathalie Loiseau, the former French European Affairs Minister, who ran for as a Spitzen, as head candidate of the French Macronist list, new renewal, and she of course was telling me how horrible and what a fascist he was, and I kept on saying, look, you can walk down Andrassy Boulevard in Budapest and shout that you hate Orban and nothing will happen to you except if you're stopping traffic, people will honk. But there's no I mean, I'm not saying they're perfect. I'm pretty sure there's a bit of corruption. I've talked about this with other people who said, look, there's corruption all of Eastern Europe. It will eventually go away, but it's still, it was the case before, it will the case afterwards. It's not the defining part of his government. And he's canny, and he is illiberal, and he himself uses the word, he is a liberal, but it's not a dictatorship, it's not a Nazi dictatorship, it's not Belarus. It's certainly not Russia. And that's what I think is interesting. And they are doing, but we are going back to something that we've had discussions on Twitter with Andrej, which is the quality of education. Those universities and the schools are, to my mind, and when I started traveling in Eastern Europe immediately after the fall of the wall, because I was so fascinated by it, I mean, I saw something that had been kept in aspects since the end of the 19th century. It's the German gymnasium at its best. And it's what the Eastern Bloc basically had as an education system. And I think that Andros probably knows this better, but I think that's what they imported into Russia in the 19th century. It's exactly
Russian
that quality of education.
Yeah.
And it exists nowhere else. And I'm told that it's being reformed in the East, to be more modern, which I think is a complete disaster. But
well, Lev, you're also a product of that system.
Well, here's the thing with the system. I think the reason why it worked in the USSR is because the teachers were competent, and because the teachers were able to, get the students to study really hard and aim for getting high grades. While at least in the United States, and I don't know how it is in Europe, but it seems like in the United States we just don't have good teachers.
Oh,
and
God,
that's
terrible.
The point is that people, I would say, the USSR, the situation, I think, is even now misunderstood in the West, because the Soviet system was actually contrary to the ideology and so on, was extremely oriented into producing a well-educated elite only. In other words, this was it was completely the opposite of in other words, the basic Soviet education was very poor. But there was a constant search, especially in those areas, of course, which were considered important, like science and so on, for the talented. And there was the same in music and so on. In fact, it was exactly the opposite of the attitude of the left in the West.
Yes. And the grades were also really tough. Like third grade math would have been like 7th grade or 8th grade math in the United States. The levels were just...
Yeah, but for the elite, yes.
Until 20 years ago, 30 years ago in France, French math in high school was better than math when people started college in America. But that, unfortunately, has gone away. But, 2 years ago, I was in Moscow for a conference, and I met, on the Russian side, there were people who'd been to MGIMO and were advisor to Putin. And I might not have agreed with them, but there was constructed thought in there. They were not stupid. It was very impressive, the quality of when they went at you. But it
is very elitist, and that what makes Eastern Europe different from Central Europe. So if you look at Slovakia, they have now more car factories than anywhere else in Europe. Manufacturing is high. You look at Czech Republic, look at Poland, look at Hungary. They do really, really well because they work hard, and they work hard for lower wages than in Germany and Holland. That's why those economies really tick and they really work. I work in tech in Scandinavia. We employ now tens of thousands of programmers in where? Ukraine, Belarus, Romania. And these countries have good education systems. They have good mathematics.
You mean you don't have to pick India and China to find programmers?
No. That it's harder to communicate with them. They're slower. They're not as good as they are in Central Europe. But this is Central Europe. So if you go to the Baltic states, the same experience you had, Anna Elizabeth, when you went to Hungary, that's what happened in the Baltic states. You have to remember that the Baltic states were part of the Soviet Union. They became independent in the 1990s. Nobody spoke a word of English when I was there in 1998. Within a generation, everyone has learned English as a second language. That's unheard of even in France and Germany. Everybody in Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia speaks English second language. Now they're returning home. They've been waiters in the UK and Sweden. They're returning home and they're starting tech companies in Vilnius and Riga. Estonia has had a plus population growing since 2017 and now taking in migrants. These countries work, and they will certainly be part of the European Union if you give them a deal to stay in the European Union. They're okay with that because their economies will work because they work hard and because they know inflationary pressure, the salaries haven't gone up too much. So they're going to go towards very low unemployment after the corona in these countries. They will do well. That's not what the problem is. The problem lies in these sort of very corrupt, extremely bureaucratic tourism economies you got in Southern Europe. They're going to drag along so much of the European budgets.
What about also the leadership in Sweden? Like there are memes on 4chan about Sweden man and things like that. Basically, having this idea that there's just like,
before we get Go ahead.
Well, okay, I just want to say that some of the politicians in Sweden.
And Elizabeth is killing it in the chat. So
oh man, you are a chat respecter, and the chat respects you.
Yeah.
The chat respects you back. So, when it comes to these politicians in Sweden, yes. Yeah. Join our Discord too, by the way. Everybody, go to our Discord. It is in the description
but before
of this.
you go, yes. I wanted to ask you, because we mentioned the Nouveau Droit, is in America, it's like this. People think of it as like this collective thing, like French theory. Like they don't know what the fuck they're talking about because they haven't. Unless you're in a literary department, you don't know. But is sort of like the tradition of French post-structuralism? Is that still a force within French society, or have they moved on intellectually? Like, Derrida, Foucault. Well, Badiou is still alive, so that's.
Oh God, yes. Well. I mean, there are students of Derrida who now write books against the woke. So that's a good
that's right. That's
right. But we have, what's really sad is I'm trying to think, and I honestly, it's possible I completely missed out on, nice. I like compliments. I'm not offended by compliments, guys. But there are, I mean, the general attitude of the French, and I must say the nation pretty much sort of got together when the New York Times and the Washington Post started insulting them. And the idea was, first of all, you people do not even understand Derrida and Foucault, and we have better reasons to dislike them than you have to like them. And you're missing many of the points. But you have an extreme left, and they are buying their stuff solid from the United States. And by the way, I would like to really complain, I have been doing this to everyone, for this thing called the Young Leaders Program, which was organized by the State Department over the years, where they bring young people to demonstrate to the various countries where they pick those promising young people that they know more about their intellectuals and their young people than the country itself does. And these people and they bring them to America. I got somebody at the State Department to tell me how it worked. In 2 or 3 weeks, where they go to all sorts of places, they meet nobody who works in the private sector. And they have essentially, they meet representatives of what the idées reçues are in academia and in the civil service are in America. Now, a long time ago, a program like that is really, to me, it was a prophetic of what became afterwards. In 1947 or 48, in Egypt, the State Department decided to invite and to give a scholarship to a young Egyptian student to go to the University of Colorado. And that young student was Said Qutb. And Said Qutb is one of the founders, was the son of one of the founders of Muslim Brotherhood in the 20s.
Yeah, that's right. They were educated. It's like Fanon was educated by Sartre, right? So that's.
And he went to Colorado, and the whole point was to show him the wonderful, bountiful goodness of America, which quite honestly, I myself feel, it's wonderful. But the thing about Said Qutb, of course, was that he looked at it and he said, these people are heaven. They have women who walked in the street with bare arms, and they dance in churches, and he came back and he redoubled his efforts for the Muslim Brotherhood. French students were sent to the same kind of universities at the same time, and they would say, these people are complete sort of reactionary bigots. Where do they hold their dances? In churches. So you can read
and people. Well, that's the thing. The American right is sort of like, they have. And I don't mean to say this like disparaging, like Al Qaeda or whatever, but they do have, like, they should have canned the anti-Muslim thing. Like, this is what I mentioned Michel Houellebecq, because the American right wing, they totally screwed themselves with this anti-Muslim thing, and they really should have looked at the intellectual history of organizations like the Muslim Brotherhood or like Hezbollah, and it's like that is your religious nationalism right there. I hate this. I mean, that's controversial.
And if they would have integrated it, they would have called themselves Al Qaeda.
Al Qaeda. But I wanted to ask all four of you. This is really great. Anna, we have to get you on again. I mean, I could talk all day about French intellectual history. I consider myself a right Foucauldian.
I agree, and so will I. I'm slaughtering and I'm doing my own books, for God's sake. Yes.
Yeah.
I have more people to bring in from Paris, because there are lone souls in Paris, and I'd like to bring them in. But I at some stage I have to go because I have a long piece to write. Yeah. Which is probably going to be during the night, and then tomorrow morning at 9 I'm getting my jab.
Ooh.
Oh
no.
First
And
jab.
we will have to bring you on. We have to talk about. I wanted to talk about the French art world as well, but that's another conversation.
Absolutely.
But but before you go, I wanted to ask just really quickly for the whole panel we could talk about. I guess the last thing, it's winding down, but I follow this very closely because he is a person I've studied fastidiously for the past years. So, what do you think of Giorgio Agamben's criticisms of the lockdowns from his very much French post-structuralist perspective, talking about how we are creating the states of exception and so forth? Well, I don't know if you, I mean, Alexander, you obviously have followed.
I'm not sure I caught the name. I'm not sure I caught the name.
Giorgio Agamben. Yeah.
I don't think people care. I don't think people care at all. So
somebody type it in the chat.
Yeah. Okay.
Here's Giorgio Agamben. Here he is in the chat. So everybody see.
Yeah.
I actually do not know him.
Oh, okay. Wow, that's surprising.
Okay. He's an Italian. He's an Italian who tries to be an Italian Foucault. So there you go.
Yeah. Italian Foucault. Yes. The Italian Foucault.
we have civil liberties issues. We do have, and they started before lockdown. They started with the Charlie and the killings and the Bataclan killings, and the fact that at the same time I'm in favor of catching the bastards and making it impossible for them to reproduce. But I'm also worried at the fact that we have slid slowly and comfortably into accepting a situation which I'm not sure is entirely sort of visible to people who say, right, this is necessary. And I don't think we're turning into fascism. I think fascism is really something different, and it's got to do with castor oil. But you have people like the fairly left-wing, but moderate left-wing barrister François Sureau, who's also a great novelist, who has written 2 books about civil liberties in France, and I think he's got a point. And so the question is, how do you manage all of this? And I think the French state itself is also exhausted. You've seen this with the brutal handling of the yellow vest, which had to do with bad policing more than the decision to to harm people. And it's part of this. I mean, we when you look at those dispositions in which people say the Patriot Act, we've had the Patriot Act in France for quite some time. It's just not called that way.
Wait, real quick, were there UN police in France during the Gilets Jaunes riots that were happening? I don't remember right now. It could be a false implanted memory, but were there EU police in that area that were not part of France, or no?
I think there was a fake meme in which there was something completely unrelated, which were actually native.
I would add that what I think is going to happen is that the corona pandemic is still taking all the headlines, and that's what we're discussing here as well. But I think what's going to happen is that these sort of old-style intellectuals like Giorgio Agamben and Alain Badiou are going to be completely relevant by 2023, 2024. I think the webcast and the podcast culture, I think the fact that discourse has moved to YouTube, this is going to move to online, all over Europe too, just like in America. I think it's a whole new landscape, intellectual landscape we're looking at by 2024, 2025.
BTR is the future.
And I think these old men or whatever who are 80 years old who write a newspaper column once a year are completely redundant.
Alexander, I have to disappoint you for a second, okay? Yeah. And Lev, please post it in the chat. My article I wrote for I Am 1776, I successfully, in my opinion, linked. It's about internet citizenship and how censoring people on a sort of decentralized platform all at once. I successfully linked the writings of Giorgio Agamben and yourself, Alexander. I managed to merge your writings on the Netizen, the Netocrat, and Giorgio Agamben's analysis of power. So there you go. I hate to inform you, but I hope you read it. And
please send me the link.
I will.
Please send me the link, Gio, right now.
I'll put it in the BTR chat.
Please put it in the chat.
The only problem is that when I go online, I'm not Sweden's Michel Foucault. I'm rather Europe's Thaddeus Russell. That's the way I read this.
Oh, there you go.
And when you
because
come back,
those are the new intellectuals. Yeah.
And when you come back, I would also love to talk about Russia's influence as well, because I think that people on our side of Twitter over here, apart from myself, they tend to look at Putin as being like this great strong man who would bring back order. I think that's absolute bullshit, personally
Yeah.
speaking.
Okay.
And,
No, Lev. No.
He is the second principle of thermodynamics. Entropy, basically.
Yeah,
That's what
He doesn't even have an exit. I mean, since he doesn't have an exit, that's why he's still in power. That's how weak he is. That's Putin for you.
I think that people want
true,
Putin
too.
to be
You can do both.
the modern day Joseph de Maistre, but I don't know if that's going to. I mean,
Okay.
Russia has structural.
Andrej, à bientôt.
Thank you
Oh, you
so
have to
much,
go.
Anne
Thank you
Elizabeth,
so
for
much.
coming in.
And thank you too. Thank you too.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I love this. I love these conversations.
This has
They're
been
a thrill.
great.
Always. Thanks
Yes,
a lot.
I really appreciate everybody for coming in, and I think this is pretty much the end. So thank you so much, Andrej. I would love to hear more from you as well in the future. I really appreciate you coming in. I'm very fascinated. I'm very fascinated by Japan. And out of curiosity, were you ever a fan of like a lot of the idol culture there when it comes to like the Japanese singers, like all that stuff?
No, I have to admit, it's not my cup of tea.
Anime.
Yes.
Do you like
I
a
have
bit
I
of
have very conservative, traditional taste in culture, and I have not much.
To be honest,
I mean, almost identical to Roger Scruton. So.
Oh, nice.
Well, but in that same vein, I think you would be surprised when it comes to anime. I think the reason why a lot of people on this side of Twitter, people who are dissatisfied with a lot of the extreme leftism, I think the reason why they gravitate to manga and anime is because they do see some kind of a traditionalist, some kind of a.
You are completely correct. Absolutely, you are right. Yes, this is completely true. I mean, I do actually know about this. Actually, wherever I go in Poland, people immediately ask me about anime and manga. So
I'm a huge fan of Japanese purisu strong style wrestling. So I don't know.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, and people are asking. Pylos asks if you. He wants me to ask you about Mishima, and what your thoughts are on
Yukio
Mishima.
Well, but I mean, I can't say. I can't in even 5 minutes. Say anything sensible about Mishima. It's really a long conversation.
Yes, well, I would love to have you back to talk about some Mishima as well. And thank you so much for everybody. I really appreciate you being here. And just real quick, to promote everybody here. Everybody knows Alexander Bard, obviously. There was no question about that. But still, guys, if you are not following Alexander Bard on Twitter, you are missing out. Here it is, Bardissimo. I love that name, Bardissimo over here. So go here to Bardissimo, follow him on Twitter. And, of course, follow everybody on Twitter that we had today. Here we have the account of... here, let me put this up. I had a great conversation with Gareth afterwards on Twitter. Everything is great with Gareth, and I really appreciate him coming in today. And, of course, over here we have Ronan McRae. Everybody follow Ronan McRae on Twitter as well. Here is his Twitter link. And now let us go to Cause33. So that's you, Andrej. What does that mean? Oh, well, of course, Andrej Kozlowski. Thank you so much, Andrej, for coming in. And here is your Twitter.
I will say that I think that there has been real cases of abuse in England, but I mean, it is always a sticky point because if it's being used for purposes, I mean, I don't know. I've changed my opinion a lot on the Islam thing since, when I first read Mark Stein in 2000, I was like 13 years old. I read America Alone, but I feel that that sort of like neocon anti-Muslim thing is a thing. I don't know. It's really, in some ways we have to protect them against Western liberalism, but that's maybe we could have another stream about that.
Yeah, that would be very interesting. And again, I want to.
We could bring. Well, we have Miran in the chat. Who? Well,
of course. Well, we have Miran, but also we have Mr. Banana Duck, who I hope will come in as well. He's from Egypt, and that would be a great stream to have. Yeah. But in a way, I do respect a lot of these different cultures for, again, these are really long traditions that have been passed on. The question to me is not even what's going on right now. It's more of, like I said before in the stream, what is going to happen 50 years from now, 100 years from now, as far as are there going to be certain sections of countries that will just become like their own thing? And maybe we could say, oh, well, what's wrong with that? But still, I guess it goes to the point that I believe that people are more malleable in the sense that there are better traditions that people can imbue. I mean, even the Japanese. I mean, let's not forget World War II, the horrible things that the Japanese were doing back then to the prisoners of war. And after after what happened, today Japan is a very different country, I think. At least I don't know. Like, Andrej, I'm curious to kind of like have this final thing over here, because it is on my mind. Do you think that Japan today, in terms of the mentality of the people, is different than it was during World War II when it comes to...
Or even like during the 80s, for instance?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Of course, it's different. I mean, actually, I think there are very few countries which haven't changed since World War II. So this is, of course, true. On the other hand, I myself would say this is a complicated matter, that the Western view of what Japan was like, or the common view during World War II, is also somewhat oversimplified, and I mean this itself is a is a long topic. So of course, in this fundamental respect, the idea that Japan would actually go back to the to this what it attempted to do before World War II is extremely unlikely. Besides, there is a situation is completely different, because now Japan has a completely different situation geopolitically. It is now a neighbor of one of the world's superpowers, and it is the biggest problem it has. It's completely not in a position to even say dream of going back to the situation that of the 1930s, for example. But of course, on the other hand, you should never forget that in one generation people can change very dramatically. Sure. I mean, this is what we are seeing, in fact, everywhere.
And this is why I would keep an open mind for people who think that people cannot change. That I think people can change if there is a right amount of positive influence to, in terms of education and things of that nature, or negative. That's right. So that's primarily my concern when it comes to a lot of these issues of migration. I don't know how things are going migratory wise in Japan, but there has been the whole thing about this concern that people have about making sure that things don't change in the negative. And I like things to change in the positive, and who doesn't? I mean, that's like obviously people want to change things in the positive. One other thing that I want to mention is that people, at least here in the US, the reason why they look up to somebody like Mishima, for example, is I don't think their lives are that exciting in their view versus going to be a samurai, fighting with the swords.
Modern American life.
Yes, the burger life.
I mean, Mishima spoke to the malaise that he felt was happening in Japanese society at the time, and how the sort of the new reality of like this market-driven society, right? So
there is an alternative view that actually a lot of what Mishima said was more to do with Mishima himself. But
that's true. Yeah.
As I think it does to a lot of people. People are always fighting an internal battle with their own laziness and their own shortcomings.
Well, that's what he overcame his. That's his whole point. Is he overcame his physical limit and
he didn't have the best leg. He didn't have the best leg, so he made people photograph him from the bottom up. But also, lastly, Martin K. Everybody follow Martin K on Twitter. I want to make sure, Martin, that you also have get a word in edgewise over here right before we finish up. So let me know what you thought of the stream and any final thoughts on the conversations that we had.
I was just sitting on my hands when they were talking about Birmingham and immigration and stuff, but otherwise, good.
Excellent. Oh, I missed all these chat topics over here. See,
and
this is what happens
I
when
gotta get into the
down.
point too that I'm also very, very anxious about what's going to happen with the Muslims in Europe, and I think they need to be saved both from liberalism and angry Europeans when times get worse. And I come from a very much immigrant neighborhood. Mm-hmm. I grew up with like 50% immigrants at my school for most of my childhood, most of them Muslims. So I think I can relate quite much to what they go through and will go through in the future if things don't change.
Would you say that they see like some, even though they're surrounded by a lot of, let's say, Western entertainment, do they still have some kind of a connection to, let's say, tradition, like they value the family
very
and all
much
that?
So.
Yeah. I mean,
very much
again,
so.
like
So
I'm not opposed to that.
in
I'm
many
more
ways,
opposed
they are
to
better suited also than Europeans because they actually take care of their own.
yeah.
They take care of their grandparents. We put them in nursing homes and leave them. It's a disgrace.
It's horrible. I mean, same thing
So
over here
yeah,
with my family. I mean, maybe it's because I come from like a Russian Jewish family. I don't know if that has something to do with it, but we would be so shocked when we would see, you know, people who live in old folks' homes. Like, why aren't you with your family? What's going on here? And I think Italians,
Yeah.
same thing. This is why a lot of Jews and Italians marry, intermarry. I think that also has to do with that kind of
Probably.
thing. And I think that's also like why people talk about like how come like Trump and Biden, like they're marrying like their kids are marrying Jewish people. I think because it's a safe bet if you have a family that cares about family. And I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of that.
You're opening up a whole can of worms for the chat.
No, but it's something that
not
I know
gonna
it's on
put that
people's
one.
minds. I know it's on people's minds, but I just want to say here, it's like that is a great explanation. It's something I think people ignore, how important it is to have families that care about each other and spread that out so that we don't have this weird situation like in America where people are completely isolated from their roots. And again, like me talking as somebody who's
a lot with my immigrant friends, and they all say the same. They're in shock, especially the ones that came here like in their late 20s, 30s, the last 10 years, and they already were grown up men with children and real jobs before they came here, and they see this shit now, and they most of them have taken their families with them, so now their parents are in the age where they get sick, and they're horrified, truly horrified.
Well,
and I understand them, and also they are among the most outspoken about immigration too, because at least like the ones I grew up with, they are most second generation, and they see the problem with just the masses not ever stopping coming. And they see the rug pulled out from under them again, in terms of
the prayer rug pulled out from them.
The low wages. Yeah.
But
right.
and again,
when you have Shia Muslims coming first and then Sunnis.
Yeah. Well, my whole thing is again going back to the kind of program that people are on, what exactly it will lead to down the road. So not so much about people not caring about their families, it's more about like what is the structure of society going to look like as far as how things are done, how education is spread and in what way. I think these are very important questions where, like I said before to Ronan, there could be ideally countries out there like Saudi Arabia or like other Middle Eastern countries that could be, that could be improved and could be a great home, because now there seems to be a lot of inequality when it comes to these big Muslim nations. They have all these rich people there that drive their Lamborghinis and Ferraris and whatever, and yet there are so many poor people in the Muslim world as well. I hope that there could be an improvement there where they would be able to reside with similar culture and enjoy the fruits of that for themselves, while being able to have communications with and trade with and mutual respect for cultures that would do things a little bit differently.
Yeah, Muslim unity is not gonna happen, I think.
Well, not among the Shia and the Sunnis, and I mean that's a whole bag of worms right there.
Not even within, but they should be small, different nations, all of them, and try to live in peace in that way.
Sure, yeah, I'm definitely not opposed to that. But I'm talking about more in terms of like help for refugees or people.
Yeah, I understand. And as smaller and more functioning nations than they are now, they could probably take in refugees, but
they've got a lot of room.
Them in many ways.
I mean,
I understand them in many ways. They really don't have the infrastructure, anything to take on refugees in these countries. Like you can't send the refugees from Yemen to Yemen too, basically. It's not going to happen, and it's not going to go well.
But they do have those facilities in Saudi Arabia. Again, this is just like one example, so I'm not going to say
Saudis
that this takes care of
resources,
it, but yeah.
They're not going to do it. They import slave labor instead. That's
yeah, a lot of Game of Thrones shit going on there, so no good.
The whole soccer or World Soccer Cup coming up, it's a total shit show.
Yeah.
Only slave labor. Yeah.
Not great. There needs to be a positive. There needs to be a positive.
But I had a point about the EU also.
Yes.
By the way.
Go for it.
The EU.
Go for it.
I'm not in opposition to the idea of the EU as a common market, having a power balance to the US and stuff like that. But in practice, that's not what it is. So I can't support it anymore, in a way. And it's rotten to the core, as Alexander said, and totally incompetent and too many different interests, and it's not going to work. But the idea of having a common Northern European front culture and don't just import American culture and academia, that's a good thing. That I hope will come out of it in years to come.
I think so. Maybe we'll bring back Mithraism. We'll see what happens. I want to get Giorgiani on the show as well. Talk with Bart. That would be exciting.
We should have Nicholas Soldo on, like, to have the nationalist pro-EU point.
We tried to get Niccolo Salo, but
I've been discussing it with him a couple times.
Well, there's going to be.
Oh, really? Maybe you could suggest him coming on.
I don't know, just on Twitter. But yeah, he's very good on that, and I respect his views a lot.
And by the way, to the comment of Andrea, Saudi Arabia is a desert. Well, Israel was also a desert until they figured out a way to make it not a desert anymore. So there are ways of going about that. It just requires
by stealing land from the Palestinians. Lev. That's
man. Okay, we're gonna have an Israel episode.
Oh my God, an Israel episode. Oh,
that'll be a lot of fun.
That'll be the suicide. The stream.
I'll be in chat for that one for sure.
Oh boy. Okay. So anyway, here's what we have coming up, guys. So we have Tuesday, March 16th, Jan Stokes, who is the founder of Ars Technica. He has confirmed he is coming on, and along with him, we are going to have Andrea Seabrook. She is back. We are going to have Catherine Brodsky. She is back. We are going to have Indian Bronson. He is back as well. A very interesting thing is happening Thursday, March 18th. We are going to have an event where two people are going to make the argument for the other person's position. So this one is going to be ANCAP versus Nationalist, and we are going to have Hero Alchemy. He is going to be with us over there, and he is going to be going against a very interesting character, a very great guy who we have had on a previous podcast. I want to get his Twitter right here to show everybody. 1 second here. He is known as Liberty Lockdown, and he is going to be coming in with us with Hero to basically make the argument for, like, Liberty's going to make the argument for the nationalist side, and Hero is going to make the argument for the anarcho-capitalist side.
I love you too, Miran. I love you too.
I love you too, Miran.
Get BB. Well, back in the day, there was this, I won't mention his name because he has since become a backstabbing turncoat piece of shit, Michael Coren. But in Canada, he actually interviewed Bibi Netanyahu when he was a neocon. This person, Michael Coren, the backstabbing piece of shit. No, sorry. So maybe we could get Bibi Netanyahu on the stream, and he will go up against, I don't know. We'll have a Hezbollah activist on with Bibi. That would be amazing.
I like Pylos' comment.
Bibi's seems quite based sometimes.
Yeah, well, I mean, Bibi, I think he does harbor some based opinions, but we'll see.
I talked about his son too. His son is on Twitter, and he tweets a lot. Sometimes
maybe we'll get him on as well. So Pylos,
Bibi Netanyahu.
I like Pylos' comment. Israel's stream will be BTR's grand finale.
Oh my God. It would yes, we will invite on Who could we invite?
It would be the Samson option.
It would be the Samson option of BTR. We would have like a Black Hebrew Israelite, and we will have on like Jared Taylor, and then we will also have on like who would be like a big Israeli pro.
We'll have
on like an Israeli, like a Christian Zionist. We'll have on like
yes.
Mark Stein against Jared Taylor.
We gotta have we gotta have people from Chabad over. You know Chabad? Chabad Lubavitch. Yeah. So Clubhouse. I'm gonna meet some of them.
Clubhouse it up.
Yes.
It'll be the Samson option of BTR.
Exactly. It's like right when the meteor is about to strike the Earth. That's when we do the stream.
We'll do the Israel stream.
Tuesday, March 23. Sean Lang is coming back with us. That's gonna be a great show.
Lang.
And Grit Cult, Thursday, March 25. Tuesday, March 30th, we are talking about Warhammer. And, of course, we are going to have Noah's Hug Box. MK Ultra Money, Remus is coming back with us as well, and we're going to have a few more guests talking about the subject of Warhammer, that you can have a painted figure of from the great Jules P. Hamilton if you become a patron on patreon.com/breaktherules for $50. But let's just go down the tiers real quick. My father is working hard on making some beautiful magnets for you people, so you better become a patron today, right now. Just go there right now, type it in, patreon.com/breaktherules. Here, I'm going to type it in for you, because you could be lazy sometimes, and I still love you. But anyway, here, this is the Patreon link. Go into the Patreon link, become a patron today, become a patron right now. $5 gives you access to audio recordings of all our past streams in the feed, and it comes out before all the other podcast players have it on. After that, you are going to also have access to our super secret area of our Discord. Although you can become a Discord member at any time, this also allows you to be able to write messages inside of btr-chat in the Discord, as well as post images, which you could also do by becoming a citizen, but that requires gaining our trust so that you don't post naughty things on there. So anyway, that means that you have to be more of a part of our BTR community so that we know who you are. Go to our Discord, become a member of that community right now. I'm going to type it in as well. It is in the description, but for those who don't want to go down the description, here it is. Here is the link for that. Anyway, $20 patrons are going to get the magnets. Get these magnets, they're beautiful, and there's going to be a puffed up, an inflated lioness magnet, as well as a magnet of definitely legit. These two are being done right now, and there may be multiple copies of them as well on the way. $30 gets you the great print from Giovanni Panicetti, right here. So let me load that up real quick over here. Where here it is, Patreon print. Look at him go. Look at Gio go. These are very beautiful prints. So be sure to become a patron. $30 tier gets you these beautiful prints. And again, $50 gets you all of the above, as well as some bonuses. You are going to get a completely custom magnet, whatever the hell you want. My father is going to create it for you. Also, you are going to get another painting from Gio, beautiful Bob Ross style painting. And like I mentioned before, Jules is going to paint a figure for you. And what else? I think that's pretty much it right now. But again, more new things are coming on the horizon. I'd love to have a BTR meetup later on, maybe this year, maybe next. We're working on it. We're going to see what's crack-a-lackin' in that department. But anyway, guys, this is pretty much it. This is the end of the stream. I want to thank everybody for being here. Be sure to join us next week, starting from Tuesday, and we are going to be continuing the ride. I appreciate all of you. And Pilo says, can I get a handmade magnet of inflation? Well, that's what's going on. Yes, Pylos, if you become a $20 member of our Patreon, you are going to have the Nala magnet. But I highly recommend you become a $30 so you also get Gio's print. But anyway, guys, this is it. This is the end of the show. I appreciate all of you. This was a really fascinating conversation, and I look forward to having many more conversations like these in the years to come. We are growing thanks to your support. Be sure to subscribe, and subscribe right now to keep us going, keep us growing, and I really value all of you guys.